Coverage of the live announcement at 6 Eastern. We'll have 3 packed hours of previewing the nominees, plenty of discussion and debate. Stay with us on MLB Network all day. It is a big day in our game. Hall of Fame Day. And we welcome Jon Heyman to the program to talk about his ballot. John, happy Hall of Fame Day to you.
Thank you. Same to you.
At what point
did you?
When did you finish your ballot? Is it quick for you, or do you take the full
You know
month?
what? Most of the players were there on the ballot last year, so that helps a little bit. But I spend a good week on it. I look at it every day for a week, and I finished it pretty early, though. I don't want to take the chance of forgetting on December 31st, so I decided about December 10th.
So let me ask you this, because Peter talked about his process too. What are you looking at? What you go back and look at numbers, look at video. You think back to, oh, I watched this guy play. There was a moment. What do you do?
I think it's a combination of your recollections, the eyeball test, and then you look at the stats, and you look at them pretty carefully. Obviously, today we're all laser focused on the stats, so I try to do my best ballot. I don't think any of us have perfect ballots. I think all of us as writers messed up during the steroid era. We're complicit in this to a degree. We didn't do a good job, and so everybody has to make their own personal choice about the steroids. That's part of the hardest thing about it. But I think if you look at the ballot, there's basically 2 or 3 guys that I said, this guy's clearly a Hall of Famer. I'm definitely voting for him. And there's like almost 20 guys that are, to me, borderline. When I say borderline, that's not an insult. That means they're about in the top 99% of players, 1%. So it's tough. It's a tough call, and I had a tough call on about 15 guys.
Well, let's look at your ballot. Let's take a look at Jon Heyman's ballot. And he, like most of the voters that we've visited with, it was a pretty easy selection to say Jim Thome gets in, Chipper Jones gets in. Among the names that you voted for that don't get a lot of run elsewhere, I want to hit you on Andruw Jones and specifically Fred McGriff, who for Harold and I is a Hall of Famer, yet he just doesn't track highly with a big group of writers.
Yeah, Fred McGriff, to me, I think that's almost an unfair one. 493 home runs, he'd be over that magic mark without the strike. The guy was an incredible player. I think 886 OPS, and even better than that in the postseason. He was a key man in that 95 World Series for the Braves. To me, he's a Hall of Famer. He did it clean. He led the league in home runs, but he did it with like mid-30s home runs. And it's like overlooked. He's been overshadowed. And I just think it's unfair that this guy does not get the due that he deserves.
Give me your guess, though, on, because it's one thing to say I've voted for player X, Y, and Z, but do you think that your contemporaries have done the same? So, in other words, your guess for the class of 2018, who do you think gets in at 6 Eastern tonight?
Well, I'm sure that Chipper Jones gets in. I'm sure that Jim Thome gets in. I'm sure that Vladimir Guerrero gets in. We have those early polling now that shows that now basically everybody is voting for Vladimir. I think that Trevor Hoffman will get in. I think it's trending in that direction. And I do think Edgar Martinez will get in. It's going to be close. I think those two are I think Edgar is going to be just over the mark to get in. So I think we're going to get 5.
So looking at your ballot, you're one of the few guys, they either vote for Bonds and Clemens. You're one of the few guys that doesn't vote for Clemens, and those two are always tied together. Why no Roger?
I think there's about 3 or 4 of us, and the other ones are doing the opposite. They're voting for Clemens and not Bonds. I believe the Bonds narrative that he did not do steroids and that he, until he saw that McGwire and Sosa had passed him by and were getting all the accolades and the headlines for a little while. So I believe that narrative. He hasn't laid that out, but I've seen that in many books, Game of Shadows and other books. And I believe it. And the guy was a 3-time MVP going into it. I feel a little weird voting for him and no other steroid person, but that's basically the reason I do it. Clemens, I'm not sure what to believe. I think that's possible with him, but I'm really not sure because just the history of Clemens with the trials and everything, I really don't know what to believe.
It's interesting. I know that a lot of people feel like all of them or none of them. But there's some things in your mind that feel like you can differentiate.
Yeah, it's a tough call. And now we do have steroid guys in the Hall of Fame. I'm quite confident of that. And that, I think, spurs more people to say, hey, look, there are guys in already. These are the two of the greatest players of all time. We need to put them in. But even they are splitting because most of them are voting for Bonds and Clemens, but not voting for Sammy Sosa, whose numbers and Manny Ramirez, whose numbers are both clearly Hall of Fame numbers. I mean, you can't make a case Sammy Sosa is not a Hall of Famer. He, in a 10-year period, hit 479 home runs. Nobody in the history of baseball has done that. He's clearly a Hall of Famer on the numbers. So, I think we're all making personal choices here, and it's a difficult situation.
Does it take the fun away from it when you have to dig into that group?
It doesn't take the fun away from it, and I feel like we're kind of deserving of having a tough choice because we did such a poor job reporting on it throughout the 90s.
But what would you have done to report on it?
Have any complaints
to make it any different?
We didn't look hard enough. I mean, there were whispers at the time. We didn't do a good job. I mean, this was going on. It was obviously a big part of the game. And I'm not going to say, like some people said, 85% of people took steroids. I don't believe that, but I do think a significant percentage of players did take steroids, and we missed it.
It's for you to fall on the sword that way is noble, but I could put myself in your shoes or any writer's shoes in that era. And where there are whispers and sniffs and little bits of information, if you're the writer that has such a dogged journalistic instinct that you can go there and do it, more power to you. You're a better man than I would have been, because the fear as a journalist who has to exist in the baseball environment is, I don't want to be the guy that's doing this because then I'm shut out of the game. Then nobody talks to me. It's tough. I mean, I know that you're supposed to be impartial, you're supposed to be a reporter, but it's easier said than done to be on top of a story like that.
Yeah, but if you're a journalist, if you hear the whispers, if you hear the sniffs, you should follow up on them, and we did not do a good job of following up on it. So, but thank you for throwing us that branch.
I think it's tough. I think it's harder.
I think we did a poor job.
Fans
we deserve this plight that we have now, and I don't complain about it at all, and that's just the way it is.
Kenny, I'm with John on this.
Yeah,
to a very large degree, but it should be mentioned also, John, back me up on this or not, but at the time this was going on, we all worked for newspapers. The standard for reporting this was extremely high. There were higher standards then. It was not the age of social media. So if you were going to say there was a problem in baseball with steroids, the first question you would get from your sports editor is, okay, give me names. You really couldn't give names without having someone go on the record and say what was going on. So I'm not saying we did a good job. We did not. John is absolutely right. But it was a difficult thing to report, and that contributed to what happened.
Do you remember, Kenny and John, do you guys remember in Denver in the late 90s, there was a writer that covered the Rockies that, because of the whispers and the sniffs, went into a locker of a player and attempted to look at prescriptions that were in that player's locker, and that writer got blasted.
Well, that's not right.
Players were upset, and he was made to apologize, and I'm not judging whether or not, this was right or wrong, but there's like a line of ethics that's not really clearly defined that this writer crossed in the minds of the Rockies. How do you find that line when you're trying to report on an issue like that?
Well, I remember also, John, with D'Andro, Steve Wilstein from the AP, when he saw that in McGwire's locker, I believe that was one of the first indications you had. Now, if it's sitting out there in the locker and it's very publicly available to see, that's one thing. Going through a locker, that's different.
Yeah,
that's where I would draw the line, too. And Steve Wilstein got criticized when he noticed it at first, and he wrote about it at that time, so I give him credit. He really got hit for it, and in the end, we all realized that was the right thing to do. Right. If it's out in the open, you can do it. And I mean, this was only Andrew, though. I shouldn't say only, but it's not.
I apologize for taking us down this road. I just had a kind of a top-of-mind question there. The announcement is coming up today. Bonds and Clemens, they're tracking higher than they have in past years. Whether they get to 75% this afternoon remains to be seen. Hall of Fame show starts at 3 Eastern. Live announcement at 6 Eastern.